So what were you saying? You were saying before about, I guess, unit title living essentially, and I guess the differences between, well, it can be different depending on if you're in the CBD or if you're out in the suburbs. You also mentioned before about, real estate agents that either specialise or have more experience than others in selling unit title properties.
Yeah.
Have you you've come across some examples of that in your travels?
Yes, I have, Brady. Just as a great observer of a homeowner and owning unit titles and body corporates, I have learnt that they're absolute bargains. And the first time I bought my unit was basically because of the price. It was a $400,000 discount to buying a free and simple nice strata title, which potentially would be worth a lot more than what I've got now. But it became a point of allowing people into the market, and I'm seeing things change in the last few years, especially with with the investors struggling a lot more with interest rates going up, and some of them are sort of shredding their portfolios and downsizing, or clearing some of the stuff out and then looking for new stuff. So there is a bit of a change, and in that change there is a point that I think there's some absolute bargains that I've seen. We've seen a lot of leaseholds, one for 2 leasehold units off Beach Road, they're student units, and they sold for $40,000
for 2 units.
For 2 units, we're seeing that weekly now, and that brings a lot of chaos. That owners that are looking at making the next step get stuck. Owners that are buying in, and I've had an experience in the main complex I live in, is an owner turned around to me and said, look, if I was to buy this house, because we're not fully body corporate, we have separate houses, it's basically a common driveway, and and he points out and goes, look, if I bought this as down the road, I'm paying $500,000 more. And he was one that definitely bought a bargain. I felt sorry for the people that were selling, because it was actually a bit of we need to refocus our finances. And while they didn't lose money, they could have probably have made $100,000 more on that sale. But they'd had that house on the market for 4 months, and they'd had 5 offers fall over. And I see that quite often with body corporates, is that they are on the market a lot longer. They are, you talk to the real estate agents, they tell you that, they get an inquiry as soon as they hear the word body corporate as a person that's buying it, they've gone. There's a big undersell of the industry, and we're building more of them. So there's a point that we've got to change. And I think for homeowners, my point is choose your agent, and that's the point. And I know the discussion, as I said, with this new owner, I'd spoken to the previous owners, and I'd said, look, I would say these types of agents are what you need, and the agents who come into that have dealt with a lot of body corporates, they may have a few body corporates on their listings, simply because they're dealing with customers that are going to buy. And if you're dealing with freehold strata title client list, you're not going to have a lot of body corporate people coming in to buy a body corporate unit, so you sort of struggle a little bit. And I think that's the question there is. So the advice there for me as a homeowner, and I'd give this to a lot of people now, is choose your agent. You need to look at who their clients are, who are they bringing into your house, why are they the ones to sell. And I know, for an example, out in Grey Lynn, because I definitely through BCCG, I talk a lot more with real estate agents now, and I know of a body corporate that sold in Grey Lynn, and the real estate agent got $200,000 more, basically because he had the right clients for his vendor. Another agent came into that building to sell another unit, and they got $200,000 less. And the only difference is agent. And so definitely I would do your homework. If you're buying, you go for an agent who doesn't have body corporate listings, doesn't have that client list, because you're going to get a bargain. If you're selling, get that agent, and you could potentially get more in selling your property. And I think that's my number one advice in the industry at the moment is be critical. And, there are a lot of agents that will tell you a lot of stuff, and I know the agents in the example of the one next to me, we're top people, we're really, really good. After they sold the property, they're knocking on doors asking to sell more, and they really wanted me to endorse them as a chairperson. And basically at this stage I was like, well, no, I'm not actually impressed with you, because you've sold the property, but you haven't got a good price. You haven't, who's your client, the person that's buying it or the person that's selling? And to me, it's the person that's selling. So you need to focus on the best outcome for them.
That one about who the agent is working for is really interesting, because I know, like in the States, for example, they have buyer and seller brokers, so you don't have the same person, straddling, one fence, so to speak. Like they'll have someone that's selling the property, then the person buying it will have a broker that represents them, and the two brokers get together and essentially, nut things out. And we know that doesn't happen in New Zealand. It's one agent that is essentially they're working for the vendor. Because they're the ones they have the contract with them, but are they necessarily doing the best thing for the vendor? And that's kind of left up to the owner, to the purchaser to represent themselves essentially. So I'm wondering if there is room in our little market for to have brokers and things. But as for what you said before about getting the agent to, or getting you to endorse the agent, I don't necessarily think that's very sort of ethical. It's up to the agent to do their best work, and if people want to use them, great, but you shouldn't have to go out there and say use this agent because I said so. And that's where we've got to have that that freedom in the open market to be able to, for people to make their own choices, really.
Yes, definitely, and that's the key takeaway is it has to be a business, and you have to think of it as a business way. So when you exit, you want to get as much money. And I keep thinking of a certain business broker who keeps saying you only sell your business once, or you only sell your house once. If you don't sell it for the absolute best money you can get, you've lost money in it. So you've got to, yes, if it's a bargain to buy, and you take my advice in finding an agent who doesn't deal in it, then, and you find an agent who does deal in it, then you'd probably say, hey, I've actually made $100,000 on the actual transaction, but because I bought $100,000 down, that's $200,000 better off in my pocket. If I bought it and flipped it in 2-3 years, I'm walking out with quite a bit more money in my back pocket for my next purchase. So definitely it can be a good way for a flipper to get into the market, or someone starting out. Yeah.
What do you think it is about apartment living as opposed to living in a residential house there? Do you think there is a bit of a stigma, and there's still like Kiwis holding on to this quarter-acre dream, or having their own piece of dirt, so to speak? Because you were saying before about apartments tend to stay on the market a bit longer, and especially at certain times of the market when it's slower. But apartments taking longer times to sell. I'd be interested to see some sort of facts around that. But from your experience, you've seen that. You've seen listings that have stayed longer and longer, and you've seen houses around sell quite quickly. What do you think it is about people that say? Do you think there is a bit of a stigma around body corporate or apartment living?
Yes, it's an interesting one, because I have a niece, and she's gone flatting, and she went out in a house the quarter acre dream, because that's what mum and dad sort of had, and that was what she thought a house was. And then they realised that they had to mow the lawns every weekend, and the neighbours didn't like young 20-year-olds moving into the neighbourhood and complained to the landlord. So that didn't work out well, and now they're in an apartment, and she sort of says, hey, it's great, I don't have to look after the backyard, I don't have to, I can go down to the wine bar down the road, I don't need to get trashed, but I can have a good glass of wine, I don't need to worry about, I can live a good life.
There are so many advantages to apartment living, and we used to live in apartments ourselves and loved it, and then you do get certain benefits from it, like often apartments are in really good walkable locations to those amenities. Like you say, you can walk home instead of having to catch a taxi or whatever, and there is that aspect where you don't have to be doing maintenance on your property in the weekend or after work or whatever. So there's plenty of advantages to it, and I wasn't trying to come at it from a negative angle, because I think apartment living is great, and there's going to be more of it. And we see around the suburbs now, you're getting say 4 houses next to each other that are being bought up, turned into one section, and up go 20 units, and that's probably going to keep happening. And it's for the better, I think. But I don't necessarily think that that unit title, unitary plan, I'd prefer it if they intensified a different region of the city. Like, I don't think the inner, like, leafy suburbs, like Remuera and Parnell and all those sort of suburbs, I don't think that they're great for intensification. One, the infrastructure there is quite old, because they're some of the older suburbs in Auckland, and I think that they should be intensifying further out, whether, like I say, on the edge of the cities rather than in the older established.
So sort of out of Mangere, where I am, out Mangere, Papatoe, Otahu.
You look at how far out does the edge of the city go. Essentially, you can look at Mangere, but then you could look out Westgate there.
Yeah,
that's massive development going on out there.
I was out there February. I went out there. We had a few things happening out west, so I went out there and spent a couple of hours out at Westgate, just walking around the streets, and I was actually very impressed with the design of the place. I know back when they first started up at Westgate, there was concern about the road widthness, that they couldn't fit rubbish trucks down the road to pick up rubbish. So they had to change a few of those designs there, but overall I was actually very impressed with the way the buildings were laid out, the way people could actually live, the fact you could actually get to a park within a really good distance, and that you could get to the markets within, it was actually easier to walk to the markets than it is to drive to the markets. The marina was very accessible. We spent about 3 hours out there walking, just seeing the neighbourhood, and again, I would have probably, as I said, there's probably 2 suburbs I would have just sold and moved into that day. Westgate was one of them, and then Owerra was the other one. As you move around the city, you sort of go, hey, I could live here. Those are the 2 in the last month I would have moved to that day. But yeah, definitely it comes down to your layouts and how everything's designed, and I think that's where it's exciting with some of the urban stuff. You're looking at out in sort of Panmure, Mount Wellington, going into Glen Innes with the intensification project. There's a lot of talk on for people that are pro that sort of what's happening there, and there's a lot of discussion about people who are against it. But I think it's really good that it can actually provide houses for people, and I think that's what we need, is a place to live. And I think we need to have that big discussion of, does it need to be the quarter acre dream? Yes, if you really want it, you should have it, but I think definitely in the situation of my niece and probably our family living as well at this stage, is no, we don't want it, because actually we prefer to have the weekends free, and that we can actually go out and do activities and not have to worry about a big house that we've got to maintain and paint, and it's sort of done for us, and that becomes quite convenient. And then we've got to focus on the interior of our place, right? And that's where a lot of people focus, is the kitchen, the bathroom, the paint on the walls. They don't think a lot about the outside.
Yeah, well, I guess you don't have to. You can't do anything about the outside anyway. You can't go and paint a wall a different colour because you like it. But what I used to enjoy about going into, say, an apartment block and you're doing like an annual sprinkler survey or something, you did actually get to go and see inside all these different apartments. And it's cool to see, say, the same space, but every apartment is renovated differently, or different furnishings and stuff. And I used to quite enjoy like seeing what people would do with their living space. Even though it's the same as the one next door, the furniture or the decoration just makes it a totally different space. And when you don't have to worry about the outside, then you do put more effort into the inside. The other thing I was going to say about that intensification is that it seems like in the 50s and things, when the quarter acre dream became a thing, we didn't have to worry about management of neighbourhoods. And it seems like as intensifications come along and people are living closer and closer together, you do have to have an element of management around that. And you look at, obviously, apartment blocks fall under the Unit Titles Act, and then you get these resident society setups as well. And it just seems like as everyone's gotten closer and closer and on top of each other, you do have to have rules and management structures to cope with that. I guess the closer we get, the more management and rules that we have to have in our lives.
Yep, and definitely the resident associations are also under the Unit Title Act. So it's not just a body corporate; it is a whole lot of different types of committees that could operate in that sort of situation. And I look at a lot of stuff out where I am, because there are demographics who don't want to buy body corporate because they feel they don't have control of the house, and when they buy a house, it's theirs. It's 100% of their ownership, and that's quite interesting because they are, developers are buying these properties, building these houses, and they are pretty much like what I have. They're separated, or they may only have one unit attached, but they're actually still being more of a free and simple title rather than a unit title. And you sort of go, okay, in 15 years time when it comes to paint, are they going to argue, or is there going to be dialogue there, or is it going to be the old, I'm going to sell, so I'm going to paint it and claim that I look after it, and try and get as much money out of it as I can because of how I'm going to pitch my sale.
Yeah. And that's when you need the advice of those experienced agents to be able to give you guidance on that, because I guess they're the ones that are they're in the market and they're dealing with it. There are we know that there's obviously agents that specialise in the inner city market and the apartment market. So if you live in the inner city and you want to sell an apartment, you'd be mad not to go with the ones that do specialise with that. I mean, it'd be nothing worse than getting an agent involved who's never sold in a body corporate before, and they've got no idea about obligations and how that whole industry works. So yeah, we got to lean on the professionals for the best advice, because like you said before, there was a really good saying actually about you only get to sell your house once. So true. You do it once, you do it properly. So
yep.
Yeah. Hey, be good to talk about the it's still really topical, the floods that happened earlier in the year. And just see what how your body corporate coped with the flooding, because we obviously had the Auckland floods first, and then it seemed within like days or a week we had the cyclone come through. So how did you guys all cope with that?
We're very fortunate. Our body corporate is very fortunate. It's in a volcanic crater.
All right. Good
so
range.
all the water comes down, and it becomes like a sink. And I've seen some storms, I've seen some flash flooding. It's the first time I've actually started packing the bag and started going, I'm going to consider going. Lucky it didn't get high. It sort of stopped about 50 metres away from our back fence, and we were very lucky with that. It was, definitely, as I said, you look out one side of the unit and there's water coming down the hill, and literally river coming down, and then this bowl was filling up. there was landslides. We have an EQC claim as a body corporate that on the other site, because we're basically going down a long driveway, so there's an A and a B, and I own in the B, and the A units lost their fence in a landslide, which was, as bad as it sounds, it was really fortunate that no houses got destroyed. So, very fortunate that, a bit of mud, broken fences, a bit of a hill that now needs to be retained is as bad as it is.
Is that hill your guys' land, or is it like council land, or who owns the hill? Who has to pay for the retaining?
Good question. That's something we're leaving to EQC.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah, I know the problem is that the owner above the owner uphill hasn't lodged an insurance claim.
Right.
So now the insurance company is chasing him to lodge a claim so they can negotiate that one. So we'll see how that goes. I know we've had discussions with that owner in the past. His theory of retaining that land was basically growing trees to put roots down, but this water went down under the roots and the trees are now sitting in the backyards of these people's units, and it's there's now a pahutakawa in the middle of this guy's backyard. As cool as it looks,
it's not meant to be there.
It wasn't meant to be there.
So when the actual floods were happening, did your neighbours and things, did you all sort of band together a wee bit and say, we need to probably think collectively here, and or was it just every man for himself, so to speak?
I had sent a few text messages out. A lot of people wanted to stay, and I have a friend who lived in the North Shore. Her house got flooded. It came up through the floor.
Oh, wow.
And when it happened, I was like, just pack your bag and go. And they're like, no, we don't want to go because it's our house. We don't want to get looted. And they wanted to stay to protect their house. And I know where we are, there was a tornado last year.
Oh.
And out in Papataui, as it went through Manukau. And, it was heavy rain. It was a lot of wind. We slept through it. And it was sort of a few hours later, the civil defence alert went out, and we sort of heard from neighbours further. We're literally a kilometre away from houses that were destroyed. That night we heard stories of people that wouldn't leave their houses for looting. So there is actually a real thing that people won't leave. And that sort of made... That sort of becomes an interesting point of who looks after who, when you want to stay. We have the flooding down the line, that there was no option for people to go anywhere, so the only option they had was to stay. But I do think out of the whole controversy of those two events, we need to be prepared ourselves. Like, have your go bags ready, have your civil defence stuff, have your... In our point, we're short of a cat box because we rescued a bird who made a mess of it, so we threw it away. So we had to put a bit of interesting thought of how we're going to evacuate the cat, because she was coming with us, and since then we have gone and bought a new cat box just in case we have to grab her and leave the house again.
You do have to think about all these things, because people that have pets, they're part of the family. You're not just going to bloody leave them behind because they're a different animal, so to speak. And you do have to make contingency. And the grab bag by the front door is an interesting one. And as much as we don't want to live in fear about having to do these things, I think it's it pays to have some, at least a basic plan about how you can deal with it. And I'll tell you one thing that actually pissed me off a little bit when all the weather events were happening was how quickly the old the traffic light system came back in for weather.
Yep.
I'd never heard of that before, when they have it's a orange rain warning and a red rain warning, and it sort of took me back a bit. Had flashbacks of the bloody traffic light system in the COVID times, and they just seem to sneak that that terminology back in there, and I see it's still here now.
Yep.
What was happening in Wellington last night with that weather, they said, it's an orange alert, and it's like, for God's sake, we never used to have that. I don't know if it's good or bad, but because we had the traffic light system for COVID, you kind of compare it with that. You kind of mentally sort of go back to that sort of stage.
Yeah, and I think with that, I think definitely after what happened many years ago with the outdoor pursuit centre where they had the tragedy with the school kids, people are very wary of the weather, and I think the weather forecasters in New Zealand do want to predict bad things well before them. Yes, this definitely that February flooding event, the January flooding event, that first one, nobody predicted it. It was just meant to be heavy rain, and then all of a sudden these floods happened. We had all this rain. What also happened is I have a suspicion in Onehunga where a certain bus was driving along a road for that weekend.
I saw that, yeah.
That was actually the underground water.
Oh, yeah.
That the water went underground and then came back up into that area. So, having spent the last 6 months convincing Watercare that there's a water leak and them telling me it's underground water, it does exist. You still have a lot of natural springs in Auckland. Just unfortunately, they like to rear their heads when we have a lot of rain.
Yeah. Hopefully that new tunnel project that they're doing from the Greylin out to the Mangere treatment ponds out there, hopefully that's going to help with that stormwater. It's quite a massive project too. Do you know much about that?
Yeah, that's the Inceptor. That's for sewage.
Yeah. Oh, it is sewage, it's not stormwater.
Yep, sewage.
Okay. Oh, that's good then.
Hope the stormwater stays out of it.
Yeah, hopefully stay out of it. Yeah, because there was some backflowing of sewage around the city. There's backflowing everywhere because the drains just couldn't cope. And there's so much water falling on the city that there's literally nowhere for it to go. So things were backing up and getting a bit mixed up there. But yeah. And so, do you think, from your body corporate point of view, did you guys have a bit of a debrief at your next committee meeting and say, like, how did it go and what should we do next time, and preparing for any other weather events?
Not really. I think because we feel separated, that we sort of think of every man for themselves.
Right.
We had one interesting event happen in that first weekend. I think there was a bit of fear in one house, and they had a bit of a domestic and punched holes into the wall, and then claimed it was actually the flooding coming through. We've left that to the insurance company.
It's
we
very
don't know.
Flooding, isn't it? Halfway up a wall.
we don't know what actually happened. I'm assuming, as I said, it could have been kids riding bikes into the wall, but yeah. It was definitely one that popped up in our insurance claim. We just left it with the insurance company, and that's up to the insurance company to sort it out, and that's the dynamic of why you have insurance, is that they play referee and the body corporate doesn't. So we've just sort of gone, yep, here's the claim details and good luck. And
how many claims did you actually have for your property?
2.
Oh, that's not bad, eh?
But one of them involved 6 houses.
Oh, okay.
So they claimed, because it's one policy, it was one event, so they were put in as a mass claim. Which
have you been privy to, like, how that process has gone? Because I know that there's big hold-ups with insurance claims and stuff at the moment. Have you sort of kept an eye on that process, and has it been quite slow?
It's been quite okay. It's been quite okay because the company has basically, they wanted us to get 3 contractors in to replace the fencing. As I said, when the hill came down, it did destroy fencing and gardening. So that was sort of, we got those quotes sorted within a week. They've been accepted and paid out. The EQC have been quite good from observation. They have actually sent an engineer to just about be on site now to do the assessments. So, it's not like we're waiting 2 years for the EQC engineer to turn up. That's happened a couple of weeks later. About 2 months later, 8 weeks is still quite a good time frame.
considering the sheer volume of claims they're having to deal with, plus the priority, in my opinion, is Hawke's Bay. That's what's happened down there is a bloody absolute disaster, and so they've got to make sure that region gets back on its feet. That was horrific what happened down there, and I was talking to a couple of people from down that way the other day, and they just said, look, where we live, unaffected, there's actually not much of the region that is affected, but where it is affected, it's just basically ruined. It's horrific.
Yeah, 3 of our owners work in food distribution, and they were part of the emergency supply drop into the area, and they did the drive. Basically, they did convoys of food supplies that were dropped off. So they came from Auckland and Hamilton and Rotorua, and basically they had a convoy plan, so they met in places and sort of went in one way in, one way out under escort. And they said it was the most horrific scenes that they'd actually seen in a natural disaster, that they had never seen. They'd only seen a small part of it, and they were allowed to drive in, drop off, and leave. And they just said, it was definitely horrific in terms of houses being lost, devastation, land being destroyed. Definitely when you think about it, yes, you think, it's a lot of land, but that land was productive land that produced food. So that's going to be a huge one, is we need food. You look at Pukekohe with the potatoes falling down the hill, and the onions rolling down the hill in the flooding, in the 2 flooding events. We need to eat, and what do we eat? Onions and potatoes. So hopefully this season is going to be shortage, bit of a potato famine.
Sounding like we're Irish.
But hopefully next year we have potatoes. If the earth is gone, then what are they going to grow in?
And that's another thing that's contributing to the price of everything increasing. There's bugger all potatoes out there, so the ones that are there become more valuable. And I heard that the loss of food, or the loss of produce in the Hawke's Bay area was in the billions of dollars. Just the sheer amount of food that they grow and export to the world, the loss was in the in the 7 figures, not just in the 6s. And I was like, bloody hell, that's staggering. I mean, we know that that's one of the fruit bowls of the nation and that, but to hear those sorts of figures be sort of put out there for information, it was staggering, I found. Let's hope that they can get those areas growing again and get things back on track. You mentioned before about pets, and it got me thinking about a recent issue that we came across with pets, and it was basically to do with a building that we manage where people are allowed pets. It's great, and the issue was that there was a fire alarm test, like a 6-monthly test or whatever it was. We gave notice, as you do. You let people know it's happening within a time frame. You don't tell them the exact time, but it's happening within a certain time. But then we had this issue with people coming back to us saying that their cats and that were bloody traumatised by these alarms going off. There was a little issue with the alarm. It went off a bit longer than it should have. But it sort of, when these people said, hey, my cat's traumatised from this experience with the fire alarm, it did raise a question about people having pets in apartment buildings, and when these tests happen, because they said, why can't you, next time it happens, can you just let us know exactly when it's happening? And it's no, you actually can't do that. You can't tell someone when there's going to be a fire alarm going off. It defeats the purpose of a test. What do you think about that? Because it was an interesting little situation to come across for us.
We had a similar one. We put in a microchip cat door. We got our little ragdoll Cross. She was a rescue from the SPCA. She was basically in dire need of a home, or else, she would have, she was a cat that was dumped on the road, and there was no way she was going to be. She was a domestic cat. She had lived in a house, and somehow she had ended up on a road abandoned. And it was very clear that she couldn't be released back into the wild. So we took her, and she's been a great apartment, a great urban living cat, because she loves the neighbours. She likes to she really likes to socialise. She likes to go and greet the neighbours and get the stroke in the morning, pat on the head, and likes that sort of interaction. So we took her in for that reason. But 6 months after we got her, we had another wild cat that had an injury, and we went through a couple of weeks of trying to trap him, and he was a bit of a sneaky one. He was escaping the trap after eating, and it took a wee bit of time to catch him. And we caught him and got his leg fixed and released him, and we realised that we created a problem, that we couldn't just not feed this cat anymore. So he ended up becoming a bit more domesticated. We sort of had him for about 2 years before he died. He was in the older stage of his life, and he was like, I really want an easy life, I don't want to be a wild cat anymore. And both cats were inside during the day, and we have pet sensors on the burglar alarms, and they'd never set off the burglar alarms. And I'm assuming that they were having a bit of a jolly play, and somehow one probably ended up on a couch or a table and flew across the room, and tripped the alarm.
Right.
And the alarms went off, and get a phone call from the security company, and then I got a phone call from a neighbour saying, the house hasn't been broken into, the alarm's just screaming. So I rushed home to turn the alarm off, thinking, okay, it must be the cats, and we found both cats on the neighbour's doorstep, really panicking because of the noise that they'd set off in the house. So definitely they are loud. We have as I said, we have a cat door so the cats could come and go. Simply because we worked out as soon as we got the first cat, she was an indoor cat, but she wants to go outside for about 3-4 hours a day, and she's really happy. And so we couldn't put her outside for the full 8-hour day or 10-hour day. She just couldn't cope. And that was probably a really good move, because she can, they can get outside. They can leave the house if they really had to, if there was a fire. But I think for an apartment, I'm sort of thinking, you've got a cat in there. Yes, it's stressed, but who's going to go check for the cat?
Then that's exactly what happened in this situation. And it might seem trivial, but poor bloody cat. I sympathise both ways, because I can see the issue that the owner's facing with their animal. But then I also understand that the obligations of the fire protection system as well, and we can't schedule bookings around people and their animals, because what happens if it was an actual fire at night or during the day or whenever? If it was an actual fire, then the same thing will happen, and be even worse. But it sounds like in your place you've got a door that goes directly outside, whereas this particular building, probably 60 or 70% of the apartments, they all exit into a hallway. Not all of them have like an outdoor courtyard, but they all exit into a hallway, and so you can't have a cat door because it's a fire door. So there's all these little considerations that have to be. And to be honest, we manage a lot of buildings where there's pets, and it's the first time I've ever had anyone say, we need to change this. Everyone else seems to be fine with it, or they find some way of managing it. But they
probably haven't thought about it, because it's the first time I've actually thought about my cat. I look at cats in apartments on YouTube and think, a cat could live in an apartment. But as I said, I'm glad we put the door in, because we really didn't want her to be a permanent indoor cat, and we didn't want her to, we wanted her to be able to go outside and sit in the sun when she wanted to, and then definitely certain times of the day when other cats are doing the round, she's quite happy to sit inside and be in her own space and not have the other cats annoy her. So
I actually missed the opportunity for the cat burglar joke when you were telling that story. You go home to your alarm going off, and potentially your cat that set it off. So another topical thing recently has been the census. That's been an interesting time for our team. We were saying before just about the variety of people that are working for the census, and how they all seem to do things slightly differently. And I was telling you that with apartments, it's difficult for them to get access. We accept that, and we understand that we're there to help provide access for them. But some of them said, look, just let me in and I'll go and do my thing. The others were like, oh, you need to come around and knock on all the doors and put the leaflets under the thing. And we're like, no, we're not there to do that. We're there to give you access, but we won't be, helping you do your job, essentially. How did you guys find the census from a body corporate point of view?
Yes, it was a personal experience. You already know this. I had COVID at that time. Yeah. So when he came knocking at the door, I sort of ignored him, and then he kept knocking, and it was like, okay, fine, I'm going to open the door, and I'm sort of trying to stand back, and he's trying to give me this stuff, and it's like, mate, I can't accept it. I need to be 2 meters away from you. I'm COVID positive at this stage. It's only because you're annoying me that I've opened the door and putting you at risk. And as soon as I said COVID, he sort of dropped him on the ground and ran. Which, yeah, definitely for us, it has, as I said last time I was on the podcast, we are considering how we are as a body corporate, and there's been some important questions being asked, and for us, we're a gated community, and people love the idea of a gated community until they get the bills, and then people drive into the gates, and then you get the repair bills, and now it's at a stage of, I don't think we're a gated community because of the cost of actually running a gate properly is actually a lot of money. And it did make it easier this time, that they could just walk in and get to all the units and get out of the place. Some people have still got their census because they're waiting for them to be collected. They're a lot older than I am.
Are they doing them on the paper thing?
Yep.
No, man, I'm all about the digital side of things. Log in, do it, see you later. I guess if you don't have a smartphone or whatever.
Personally, the last two censuses I've actually done them. There were a few that I was overseas, and it was basically someone that works in healthcare that explained to me that the decisions of how many hospital beds at the local hospital is based on the census, and you sort of hope that when big emergencies happen in life, that the hospital's got a bed for you. You're hearing stories now in the media of Auckland hospitals being at capacity. That's how important this data is. No
doubt about the data's being important. I was going down the track of how it's gathered. I like the fact that you can do the census on your smartphone and not have to fill something out and then send it back or have someone pick it up or anything like that. But totally get the census.
I mean, definitely that having it online, because we did it online. It was easy and it was painless, and I was expecting pain, which is the reason I would love to avoid it, but you got to do it. So it was good that it was easy. It was actually really simple, which is good. Last time our area was part of the double census, so they do survey areas where after they've done the census they actually go and hound you down and try and find everyone in that area to redo a secondary census.
What's that for?
Well, it's to do with a sample of accuracy. So they know that there's 10,000 people in an area, so they've got to complete 10,000 forms or 12,000 forms to see whether the demographics are accurate. So they were actually like ringing you up on your phone, and I was trying to avoid them left, right and centre because I did the original census and I really just wanted to end it there. But they were like, they got my phone number, they were ringing me going, can we do it right now? And it's like, no, I'm at work, I don't want to do it. But yeah, it just got to the stage of, no, I'm being harassed by these people, I'll just do it. They're knocking on the door morning, night, lunchtime,
Annoying your cat, probably. I still think that I'd like to see the census and like the vote that we've got coming up later on there, the election. Why don't they just combine them, and if you can do the census online, then surely we should be able to vote online as well. Like the internet security now is quite different to what it was, a couple of years ago, 10 years ago. Everyone will bang on about how it can be hacked and all this sort of thing. And it's like, yeah, but paper can be hacked too. I mean, you look at the commotion that was caused after the last American election with all these votes and ballots and all the accusations that went flying there. And I just think let's do like 4-year terms with our government, and let's do the census at the same time. So it might take you a little bit longer to vote, but then at least it's one shot and off you go.
Possibly, but your census is not just those that vote.
Yeah, I think absolutely, you're right. But I think voting should be compulsory as well. Get more people engaged.
I'm sort of glad that I was, my parents had always told us that if you don't vote, you're voting against your beliefs. So, you need to, use your voice. You then hear stories from people that tell you that no, they don't. They feel that if they vote, they're giving information to the government, and that that there's going to be spies and
tinfoil hats.
Yeah, I don't know what to believe in that sort of stuff there, but I do believe that you have a voice, and you've got to be able to contribute your voice. I remember when I was 15. There was a big discussion on whether I was old enough to do some travelling by myself, and what was the worst thing was actually between airports. And there was like, what happens if he gets lost? And I had an uncle that turned around and said, the thing is, he's got a mouth, he's got a voice, he can ask for help, he can tell people he needs help, and he can get help, he'll be okay. And I think you need to take that into politics, that we want the country to run certain ways. Definitely the Auckland elections were very interesting. Nobody predicted the way that turned out at the end. If half the dramas of politics could be as dramatic as the Auckland mayoralty race, it would have been really... You would have a lot of top series contenders.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, I mean, considering the piss poor turnout that Auckland got and usually gets, it's a surprise that that election was so close. How is everything going with the BCCG? Like, what's the latest that's going on there with the Body Corporate Chairpersons group?
Yes, so definitely there's been a lot of work with Census. Because there's no national database of body corporates, so it's trying to find contacts that they could contact to get into buildings, and that was an interesting challenge because there's thousands of these body corporates, and they're not necessarily the easiest buildings to get into. They have extra layers of security, and people need to get access. There's been a lot of talk about the change. So we've been expanding into Christchurch and Queenstown, and there's been a big talk about how do we best provide resources. So we've been doing hybrid meetings quite successfully in Auckland, or we've been doing them, and there's been a few challenges as well.
The old technical challenges. I haven't actually been on the other end of one of those online meetings. I'm usually always in the in the room at the time. But have you had sort of feedback about how the online meetings are going?
Yes. So definitely online. Hybrid is very difficult when you actually start breaking it down, because when you got 60 people in a room, you may want to address the audience at the start. In that room, but everyone else can see what's happening and they feel a bit excluded. The microphone might not be, it's stuff that, yes, it's not for that audience, and then you find that people get frustrated and it bounces, and that's been a huge challenge. Is if you don't get it right in the first 5 minutes, you get a lot of complaints. So we have been looking at ways to engage a lot more. So how do we balance people in a room versus people in, that are in Wellington or Tauranga or Queenstown, and their wishes to get a good experience. And that's been quite interesting, that we're sort of looking at do we do it in balance? Do we do something which is solely designed for both audiences, or do we do the old school styles which we used to do of filming and then put it out later?
Well, I think you got to do both. You got to do as many different ways as you can, really. I know, like it'll start to, the costs may make certain things prohibitive in that, but in order to reach as many people as you can, you kind of got to, chop it up and have it accessible in as many ways as you can. If that means recording it for posterity and having it on the website, great. If it means having a more beefed up sort of like production when you guys do the actual in-house meetings, then looking at getting more cameras or lapel mics or something like that. That's it's just things that have got to be thought of, and there's also people out there that can assist with that. I mean, there's a guy that we've come across at a few AGMs for really big buildings. And he's kind of made this little side hustle business of doing these hybrid meetings. So he gets all the cameras set up, he's got all the microphones, he runs the Zoom side of things, and he does a great job. It's kind of like watching a TV producer, producing a show. Like, and he's on top of everything, so that the meeting can take place without people having to worry about pressing a button or doing this, kind of like what I'm doing now. But the meeting happens, and he's the guy that's there just running it in the background. And so he'd be quite good to probably have a chat with just about what would be the next phase for you guys about upgrading your technology and seeing what else can be done.
Yep, definitely, and I think the room is also important, that we've discovered, like, this room's pretty good. It doesn't reverberate. And balance, like where our best footage has been taken in these hybrid meetings has been a proper room designed for hybrid. Just the biggest issue is the biggest thing with BCCG is that we don't just represent body corporate chair people, body corporate committees. We also have a contingency of body corporate managers, building maintenance people like yourselves. So all those sorts of people want to feel that they could come to a safe space, and that's been the biggest challenge. Is if we went to a building and it was another building manager, you might feel that you're sort of invading their space or spying on them, and you don't want that drama in your life. So there's sort of that balance, and I think now behind the scenes we have been working on what our venues look like. How do we get the best balance between making the safe spaces versus the do we just sort of say this is the best we can do and live with it? I don't think we're at that stage yet, but having those reviews. Also, do we look at using smaller rooms like this boardroom where you have camera up on the screen and have fewer people there and want more people to tune in online? All those sorts of questions have been currently up for discussion. So
I actually think that meeting would better suit an auditorium, like a small auditorium where you've got seating, like stacked seating, and then you've got better environment acoustically as well, and just having a better, better experience for people. Where it is now, it works fine, I guess. But if you're going to take that next step and really, because the hybrid thing's not going to go away, it's just going to become more and more of an expectation, and that. So it's got to. That's where you've got to improve the production of it. I think is having a better venue and a better better cameras and microphones and things like that. So I think maybe an auditorium. And if you know someone that works at the university or some place that has an auditorium, then have a chat with them about it.
Definitely, if anyone is listening and they do have contacts to any of the universities in Auckland, feel free to email me.
You've probably got some people that attend the meetings that would have contacts like that too. So the other thing we were going to chat about was you mentioned something about committee training, because I'm a big believer in I think that that's really what that BCCG group should be focusing on, is upskilling of committees and having education for committees. So you guys have done a bit of work in that space recently.
Yes, so it is still very early days. So there is a learning support committee that's been sub-formed between Auckland and Wellington. A little bit of an input from Tauranga. And the purpose of that is, at the moment, we have used an Australian training program, but we want to make a New Zealand one.
Is that the scans?
Yes.
SCA? Yeah.
Not because it's bad, but basically we think that there's a lot of content that could be New Zealand specific. Also, we want to make it more potentially an online module, so that way we could actually make it really cost effective and actually, offer some really good incentives to body corporates, and that it can be in the time, any time, any place, with a realistic cost. So that's sort of quite an exciting project to be involved in. And
yeah, it's good, man, and it's good to see those initiatives. You're developing that, and it'll be, like I said before, there's no doubt that the hybrid thing is here to stay. I mean, you have to have an AGM, or most meetings now, I think there has to be some hybrid element to it. So the more you can get people involved, if they live down in Queenstown or overseas or whatever, the better. It's the old days of people not attending because they lived in another part of the country, having to fly up here and all that sort of thing. That's gone, thankfully. So yeah, good for people to be able to have their say and and be part of their communities, essentially.
Yep, definitely. And that's quite an interesting part of what BCCG is trying to do, is promote the education. Yes, there's been a lot of change with the legislation, and definitely Tim Jones has been quite involved with that, and he's done a fantastic job with. Now we've got a new act that's rolling out, and we're sort of scratching our heads going, it sounds great. Now it's a case of knowing what it looks like. So there is going to be some changes, like probably one big change in our body corporate with the Unit Titles Act is my role has changed a little bit. And basically your building manager and your body corporate chair has to be two different people. A lot of smaller body corporates was actually the same person. So we've had to sort of redefine a few roles and say, look, this is, we actually need these roles to be done. And probably for me there's a point of learning to not get get over involved in the maintenance side. So being more of the committee, I would prefer to be doing the maintenance. So definitely, if anyone in my body corporate is listening and they want to take the chairman's position, feel free.
Next meeting.
I can offer a slight internship as well. So, so yeah, that's definitely going to be a change. So where you would hear certain things like just picking up rubbish after rubbish day. It's now more expensive because we've got to bring a contractor in because effectively I can't do that role anymore because it's a conflict of interest, and that's going to be an interesting one, whether we're going to go back to the old ways or whether we're going to stay the new in a new realm would be very interesting to see in the next few years.
Hopefully there's still going to be some level of practicality about it too, because it kind of gets a bit ridiculous if you've got a small body corporate and people are essentially just tidying up around the house, and the fact that they're on a committee shouldn't prevent them from just keeping their property tidy. That's part of what you do.
I think that's it, but there's stuff there like now. We had a dog owner that lives next door, and the fence with the landslide, a lot of the other fence became unbuckled, and the water going down the hill just over years had actually rotted out a fence post. So like that repair there, because it's on common property, normally I would have been there with hammer and nails because that was the cheapest option. Now it's a point that I've actually got to bring a contractor in, and I think that's sort of the key difference, that instead of going, okay, you got to spend your Saturdays doing the work because we're doing the cheapest fix, is now more that we've actually got to look at how do we do it. Do we have a person that focuses on the fixing and repairing, and a person sort of chairing and managing, and that will be an interesting sort of dynamic. So definitely, definitely the working bee days, the body corporate chair should turn up to them and be seen and be present, and not sort of sitting up at the top of the penthouse apartment drinking champagne. May not go down well.
Well, the champagne will go down really well. But yeah, it's the application of these new rules, and the intention of them and how they actually pan out in reality can often be two different things. So you've got to just, I guess, have a period of like trialing and testing them, but then seeing how they work and how they perform, and making adjustments as you need to. So yeah, it's I mean it's all change at the moment, isn't it? So you're living in an environment of change, really. So yeah,
and definitely, as I said, with the gate situation, because I'm myself and one other owner are the closest to the gate.
You're the gatekeeper.
Yeah, it almost feels that way. So there's sort of there's got to be discussions there that really, if we resurrected the gate, we would have to change it, and it would actually come onto my private yard. And I've said to people, look, as a chairman, I've got to wear two hats in this, so I've got to choose one, and the one hat I have to choose is homeowner. So you need someone else who's another owner to come and wear that other hat, and because I would be I always use a scenario that in this one I could literally charge you guys 20k rent because none of you are involved.
To have that fence post on your bit of land.
Yep. I could do something that unethical and get go see a lawyer, a couple of $100, and there's a new contract for the body corporate to sign. Hey, I'm the chairman, I can sign it. So that sort of stuff there can actually protect you. But yeah, with having that discussion of, having multiple hats on what actual reflection do you need in a discussion, I think is probably the key point. Is that you probably need an owner that's way from the fence, from the gate, who's probably going to have a few minor comments on, how easy is it to access. Obviously the most immediate owners, they probably have an opinion on noise and squeakiness and middle of the night. Yep.
Yeah. Well, it's at a committee meeting the other night, and it was good to see the body corporate manager get the old conflict of interest register out.
Yep.
And everyone that was present at the meeting had to declare if they had a conflict of interest or not. And that actually became, it was good to see that they went through that process for a start, but it was interesting to see people's reactions to it. In the end, people just sort of, they all wrote, well, most of them wrote something because they'd rather have it out there than not. Yep. So people were quite happy to say, well, I've done this or I do this, and they're like, well, that could be seen as a conflict, it might not, but just declare it anyway.
Yep.
So it's definitely something that that needs to be done, and for the right reasons too, I think. So.
And that's another big change with the Act, is the conflict register is now part of the Act. So, it's especially for committee members, you've actually got to declare. So for me, having a shareholding of an electrical company, bringing them out to do work has got to be known and above board, rather than just bringing my brother in to just do a quick cashier in the weekend.
Exactly.
Because there's a bit of a conflict there. Although we did benefit from it, the conflict register a few years ago, because I was working for Fulton Hogan, and there was a job that went south, had a little bit of a problem, and I managed to find them a way to save the job and save a bit of money. And the boss sort of said, in recognition, because we have some lights, we'll change the light bulbs for you, because I was looking for a contractor who could be on a platform to just go up and down and do that sort of thing. So we had to make a contribution to pay for that, but it was actually through a charity. So
nice.
Sometimes it can work, and I think it's being clear. But there are, as I said, it's definitely when you're not clear is when it's going to run into problems. And I think, even the conflict of register can actually help you find the strengths of a committee or an ownership. You find that someone has particular strength in exterior painting. They may not want to be involved in the painting project, but they may have an opinion, and their little bit of advice on choosing paint specs, or whether the contractor's right, might actually be a great asset to everybody else.
Yeah, and I don't necessarily think it's designed to prevent people from providing their service if they are an owner on the body. It's just there to say, as long as people are aware of it and there's no sort of funny business going on in the background. I think if you've got people in the body corporate that are useful, and they want to contribute, then by all means, they should have the ability to offer their service. Yeah. Well, that's cool, man. Well, it's good to have another chat, wide-ranging chat about all things to do with the body corporate. So enjoyed that, and we'll do it again at some stage further down the track. Cool.
Perfect.
Cheers, mate. Appreciate that.
Awesome.